Welcome back to Misunderstood. I'm your host, Rachel Yucatel. Okay, so today we have the resilient and compelling Jessica Willis Fisher on the pod. She rose to fame as a member of the musical group, the Willis Clan. You guys might remember them from America's Got Talent originally, or from their reality show, The Willis Family, where Jessica shared her life from a very young age. Beyond the headlines and TV spotlight, the Willis family dynamics differed from what was being depicted. Jessica's very personal story was full of dark secrets and a complex relationship with those closest to her. In her autobiography out now, Unspeakable, Surviving My Childhood and Finding My Voice, Jessica reveals the secret she had kept since before she had real memories that her father had been molesting her. He had been abusive to all of his kids, basically, and his wife. A secret they all kept, not only from others outside the family, but each other. With grace, resilience, and unwavering determination, Jessica has navigated the highs and the lows of fame, family, and personal growth. She opened up about the transformative moments that have shaped her life, both on and off the stage, and how she keeps moving forward with a positive outlook. It's an intimate conversation filled with honesty and reflection you won't want to miss. So please, I hope you enjoy my conversation with Jessica Willis Fisher. Jessica, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for making time to chat with me today.
Of course. Thanks for making time for me. I'm going to jump right into this with you. You have lived like two parallel lives that are completely different, which is fascinating and why I wanted to have you on the show. I want to start with your childhood because we all see you now as an adult, or have some of us have followed you and your family, and have assumed that everything has been picture perfect and people wish that they were part of your family. So can we talk about your childhood and what that was like before you became known as the Willis clan, but like what was growing up like for you in a household of 12 children, being the oldest?
Yeah, so if we go all the way back, we none of us are like twins or triplets or like 8 kids at once. We all came one at a time, so being the oldest, I was the only one who was the only child for a half second. And then,
Yeah.
so it wasn't as strange, I guess is what I'm saying from the very beginning. I was just talking with someone the other day about this, we went to church where my grandpa was a pastor. My dad went to work. My mom studied teaching. She taught us at home. We had 2, 3, 4, 5 siblings, and that's still within the range of normal. So, I didn't have these indications that I had such a strange life from the
Hmm.
beginning. It definitely got more and more strange and extreme as I got older on multiple levels, So you mentioned the Willis clan. We ended up that I was in my early 20s in a family band that was performing, that was on TV. And so, by then it was very outside the norm, having 12 kids, being homeschooled all the way through, being on TV, singing with the family. How did that work? How did we feed everyone? But it's so hard. You grab any 12 or 13 or 14 people, put them together. Everybody has their own story within that story. And I
Mm.
think it's very hard for even regular bands or regular families, if you're trying to portray an outward story, it gets diluted down, hopefully not in a toxic or manipulated way, but
Yeah.
you do lose something. In my situation, it was definitely toxic. It was definitely abusive. So, you know, if we skip forward maybe past the first few years of my life,
Yeah.
I eventually did realize that there was something really wrong. I now have the vocabulary to say that my dad was being sexually abusive, abusive from my earliest memories. I just, again, didn't have the vocabulary at that time. And secondly, I didn't know any different. It was there ever since the beginning.
Right.
Um, Later on in my childhood, I think things like our family's particular strain of religion and kind of worldview kept us pretty isolated to where I didn't end up going to school and talking with other teachers and kind of getting other points of view. We eventually left the Christian church that we were with and started having a home church that was much more niche and just less people involved, which meant it was, again, more isolating. Not saying any of those specific things are always toxic in and of themselves, but it did combine into something that my dad took more and more advantage of to be more and more abusive over time.
Yeah, I'm curious about how, like, was this a religious thing that they didn't believe in contraception and they just had as many children as she got pregnant with, or I know I read that your father came from a very big family as well. Is that correct?
Yes, it's actually interesting because my dad initially was just one of three kids.
Mhm.
I don't think his parents were set. It doesn't sound to me like they planned to have, you know, double digit, or well, they didn't get to double digits, but many, many kids initially. They just had three, but they eventually did have more kids. They had six more kids. My dad ended up being one of nine kids.
Right.
And, I'll just go off of, I can't know the inner thoughts and certainly the changing, escalating thoughts of anyone, including both my parents, but I can go off what they said,
Mhm.
how they represented their beliefs, and what they told us we should believe. And yes, very much so, having lots of kids was part of God's design in their mind.
It was a blessing in their mind.
Definitely a blessing, and there was the greater context of, you brought up my dad's family. There was tragedy where
Yes.
6 of those 9 siblings ended up dying in a horrible car crash, in a vehicle accident, and so, I do think that, every human life is sacred, has value and meaning, and, if one of us has value, all of us has value. And I
Yeah.
think that anyone that sees or has themselves lost a child just knows that there's something there that's never not going to be just so sad and such a tragedy. And I think that for me, I was a young child when that happened. That
Oh,
was right around my earliest memory. So I think that I personally realized just because I'm a kid doesn't mean that my life is guaranteed.
right.
Even this day and age, we have children that also are not, none of us are guaranteed life. And when we're living around true danger, whether that be domestically in what we think is a safe place, but a horrible tragedy like an accident happens, or if we're in a zone, we're in war, we're in a different place, like really, I think internally you go, oh, my life is not a given, and that changes you.
Yeah.
And that was part of my early kind of foundation of the world.
Yeah, and because we're gonna talk about your dad in a little bit, I am curious about how that tragedy affected him. So all 9 kids were born. It's not like 6 of them died and then they had another 3. So all 9 kids in the car and only a
It's
few survived?
it was the other way around. My grandparents had 3 kids that were adults,
Okay.
or reaching adulthood, and then they had 6 more
Wow,
kids
okay.
10 years later. And then my grandparents were traveling with those 6 younger kids, and they were in an accident. My family, my dad, the other older 2
We're not
siblings
there.
were not present.
And
Um,
was he did both his parents survive?
they did. It was a whole story, and I mean, for the longest time growing up, if there was some larger story about our family, it wasn't about me or our band or the kids or my dad. It was about this tragedy that my grandparents had actually survived and
Wow.
gone through. And there was quite a bit of awareness. I think even internationally, in faith communities, but even in the news, international news, this was a pastor and his wife who had this horrible circumstance. They were surviving. They were survivors. Their children had passed, and they had this really strong, striking um, faith that they shared, that they still believed in God, that they praised God even in hard times, that they
Mhm.
were, of course, mourning, but their faith was going to help them through. And, that's me summarizing, but that's on the internet. People can find some of that. And it did end up coming back years later that the accident was a result of a license for bribes illegal thing that ended up jailing the governor and everything. So it was, it was bigger than just my uncles and aunt and my grandparents.
Right.
But yeah, kind of a very strange, like unforeseen thing that was just part of our family story.
I'm curious, are they still alive, your grandparents?
They are, yes.
And are you close with them?
You know, I care very much about them, and I truly believe that they care about me as well. I think I don't want to speak for them from my perspective. Um, it's a really difficult thing.
Yeah.
Me trying to survive what I have been through and what I feel like I need to speak about. I think is just as valid as what anyone else might like to say, and I think that they have their own story and their own perspectives, and I
Right.
want
So
to.
that's the reason I bring it up because, I know, and we'll get into this in a second, but I know for so long, so many of you, like I said at the beginning, had these parallel lives where everyone saw you in a certain light and that you were happy and a very healthy family. And then in the shadows, your father was abusing all of the children, some of the girls sexually and the boys physically. And, so the reason why I ask about your grandparents is because in a lot of families like this, certain family members take sides or don't believe it could happen, or when they find out it happens, disown the person that's been abusing the family because they take your side. I'm curious, how that all panned out with not the family, not the 12 of you, not the 14 of you, but the external family, how they handled the situation when all of it came out.
I love and respect that my whole extended family system, and I'm not gonna lie, it's been very hard, and I can't even say that I fully understand from their point of view how hard it is. We have definitely taken different roads in how we've handled different things, but I have been able to talk to them. I was able to share my book with them. I just know that I know and respect that that's hard for them. And yeah, I wish them nothing but love and the best and all of that. And I know they feel that for me as well.
Well, despite what you went through in your childhood and all your siblings, because I've heard some of them speak, you all clearly were raised very well because you all are very careful in how you speak and are careful not to speak for others. I've always noticed that about you. You make sure you speak from your point of view and that you don't give words to them, which is not normal. I mean, many people
Well,
choose to speak for other people.
right. And I always hope that people don't take that as being to some degree that leaves room for interpretation for people. Like if you say less, other people can assume things,
Yeah.
which can be painful in and of itself and confusing, but I can't actually run around and play whack-a-mole of like trying to correct people's perceptions and
I don't
you
think it comes off that way. I think it's very clear that you want to give your perception and you cannot be inside anyone else's head
yeah.
and speak for them. I've been hearing a lot about the benefits of fasting, and they all sound amazing. Weight loss, increasing your mental and physical performance, good gut health. But I never thought I could do the whole not eating thing. That was until I tried Prolon. Prolon is a plant-based nutrition program that nourishes the body while making cells believe that they're fasting. It was researched and developed for decades at the University of Southern California Longevity Institute and backed by leading U.S. medical centers. Prolong helps promote healthy blood sugar, supports cardiovascular health, and reduces abdominal fat. But Prolong isn't a diet, it's a science. And it all starts with Prolong's 5-day program full of snacks, soups, and beverages, all designed to keep your body in a fasting state. It's unlike anything you've ever experienced. So I did the 5-day program last week. Okay, I really cannot tell you how great it made me feel. It's like pressing the reset button. First of all, they send you everything you need for the entire week in a box. It's prepackaged, labeled day by day, and ready to go. My favorites were the soups, actually. I'm not like a big soup fan. The last time I had soup was like ramen or something. The tomato soup, amazing. I actually was thinking of like ordering more. Also, they have like these little chocolate crisp things that are really good. I mean, I could have snacked on more of them for sure. And they have little packets of olives that were so good. You don't feel hungry. So I can't say more about how it made me feel. I was nervous to do it. I will be honest with you. But, the best part was that I didn't feel the hunger that usually comes along with the fast. And I really just loved it. And I will tell you, I do fit into my clothes better this week. So right now, Prolong is offering Misunderstood with Rachel Yucatel listeners 10% off their 5-day nutrition program. You go to prolonlife.com/understood. That's prolonlife.com/understood for this special offer. That's prolonlife.com/understood. Are you tired of trying skincare trends that you see online that have 7 million overcomplicated steps and then don't even work? That's what led me to today's sponsor, OneSkin. Their products make it easy to keep your skin healthy while looking and feeling your best. No complicated routine, no multiple step protocols, just simple, scientifically validated solutions. The secret is OneSkin's proprietary OS01 peptide. It's the first ingredient proven to switch off the aging cells that causes lines, wrinkles, and thinning skin. And those aren't just empty promises. They've got studies to back it up. If you've listened to my podcast, then you know I've been using OneSkin products for a while, and I'm totally hooked. I use them every day consistently, and I take them with me when I'm traveling. One of the things that drew me to OneSkin was they believe the purpose of skincare is not just to improve how we look, but to optimize our skin's biology. They create next level skincare, and I'm a huge fan. But I'm not alone here. OneSkin has over 4,000 5-star reviews and was recognized by Fast Company as one of the most innovative brands in 2024 already. Can't think of a better time for you to get started. Also, I've gifted this to my mother. She now buys it on her own. She's a 78-year-old woman who, if she was on my podcast, she would tell you how much she's loved it. I can't tell you how many people DM me about purchasing this with my code and they are loving it. Can't get enough of it, want to know what I use and tell me their experience because they basically just, cannot get enough of it. So for a limited time, you get an exclusive 15% off your first OneSkin purchase using the code UNDERSTOOD when you check out at oneskin.co. Try OneSkin and enjoy younger, healthier skin without all the extra steps. OneSkin is the world's first skin longevity company. By focusing on the cellular aspects of aging, OneSkin keeps your skin looking and acting younger for longer. Get started today with 15% off using code UNDERSTOOD at oneskin.co. That's 15% off OneSkin with code UNDERSTOOD. After you purchase, they'll ask where you heard about us. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. And something you said at the beginning of this interview is that there's 12 of you, really 14 of you, and you all have your own story, and you cannot speak for any other person's story but your own. And because you're such a big family, stories do get lost because we see you as one family as opposed to individuals. And that must have been hard growing up without having that too.
And well, that's what I was about to say is I actually feel my personal interpretation looking back is that there was a lot of speaking for each other in very toxic ways. And again, I think reality TV, society, social media, it kind of pushes us all in that direction, share the highlights, dumb down the story. I don't mean to offend anybody, but if you think reality TV is 100% reality, it's just not. You say certain things when different people are in the room, hopefully not in a manipulative or lying way. It's just the reality is if there's other people in the room, it shifts the chemistry, it shifts the reality. And I think it's very, very hard for certain people. And I'm one of these people. It was really hard for me to learn to function in that. It ended up being part of my survival. I didn't really have a choice. TV was always very uncomfortable for me. I just think it's not something that naturally works for me, but I kind of had to do it. And I think I look back and I cringe so many times when, my parents would speak for all of us kids, we all agreed on everything, or I would do a lot of speaking for the band. And there were all these little bits. You can look at so many interviews. Again, I was in that environment for the first 24-ish years of my life. Those TV years were only 3 or 4 of those years. So it's not what I'm saying about that time applies to everything, but that time was so strange, and there was what was so wrong about it. Many things are wrong, but one was just how far the story had gotten from the truth. And you're
Yeah.
speaking to those like parallel lives, or I would say like a double life. Like I was
Yeah.
just my sanity was being so challenged and so stretched, so on the edge of like it felt like nothing in my life was able to be real or honest or congruent. And so
Right.
that was the top of top to do item when I did land in therapy, and just trying. So now, like, trying to be honest, trying to say what's authentic, what's real, and what's mine to say is like, I'm really conscious about that.
Yeah. No, I love that. Okay, so just to go back before you guys became famous, you said you were homeschooled. Did you have any friends outside of your family?
It's very interesting. I still feel like I'm learning how to be a healthy human, and friends hopefully are part of that. And I sometimes may, for the rest of my life, feel a little behind on that. And a lot of homeschoolers may feel that, maybe not all of us. I
Mhm.
think, the term homeschool, depending on what your home is, homeschooling is not the same. You get 100 different homeschooling families. You could get 100 different versions of that. So I
Mhm.
don't want to really speak to it as a whole, but in
And
my
you mean you feel behind in terms of life lessons and education, or just in terms of interacting with people and seeing what
well,
that's like?
yeah, so specifically, I don't have school friends.
Yeah,
There
right.
was no school, um, middle school, high school, elementary school, whatever, didn't go to
Well,
college.
I don't talk to any of those people anyway, so you really didn't miss out. But
It is,
it's the interacting,
yeah,
that you may have
it's
missed out on.
it's interesting to talk to other people, and, I really loved learning, so I'm like, somewhere on my to-do list is, like, college, question mark? Like, I would love to do some higher education. We'll see, but for some people, like, that don't go to college, like, "I really missed out on that social thing," and, like, for me, it's almost always, like, an actual educational thing. We traveled a lot, so we met a lot of people. It's not
Right.
that we were kept under a rock. Sometimes homeschooling means you never see people. We were not only seeing people, we were put on stage, people would be surprised. They go, "You don't seem like homeschoolers," because we were able to talk to people, right? But I think that it was definitely a mixed bag, like educationally and socially.
Yeah.
So where I am with friends is I think that if you're not able to be healthy, happy, know who you are, know how to do any sort of relationship, the more work you do on yourself, the better friend you can be, the better sister, the better wife, friend, whatever. So that is definitely a work in progress. I have been so helped by communities and by friendship. And I think we heal in our context and in our communities. And so I think real good, real true and good relationships, whether they be romantic relationships, partnerships, friendships, are a huge healing strength in our
Mhm.
lives. So
Yeah, I agree. As you get older, though, it's really hard to make new friends because everyone has their own lives.
it
So
can
I
be.
would assume your husband has become probably one of your best friends. He
Yeah.
knows you, knows everything about you. But sometimes it's nice to have, a girlfriend that's separate that is just, but again, it's so hard to find that no matter your age. So you haven't missed out on everything just because, you didn't have that growing up. I mean,
It is
I
what
just
it
have
is.
a very small group of friends.
Yeah, we can't go back. And, truly, whether your parents were kind of extreme as my father was or not, the
Mhm.
choices that our parents make do set us on a path that at some point we have more and more agency to choose differently.
Sure.
But it's crazy how much your trajectory is chosen by people like before you even got on this earth, and then before you had a say. And that can show up in your education and your career and your um, community and all of that. And I'm in my early 30s now. I don't have kids.
Mm.
I'm in a town where a lot of people are pursuing similar career as me, so I think, I see a positive of that, where there's a lot of creative energy around. And I think it's fun to have friends that are very different from you because you benefit from different perspectives and
Yeah.
your horizons are widened and you have more empathy and more insight. But man, it's great to have people that just know exactly what you're talking about, exactly what you're going through.
Yeah.
So yeah, I try to keep a balance, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, all right. Well, how did music come into your life? I mean, were your parents musical? Were you all of a sudden this little girl with a good voice and they said, "Oh, let's have everyone take an instrument." How did music become part
Okay.
of your clan?
So I actually just got back from Ireland, and I have been there now many, many times. But Irish music was the first music that really kind of got into my blood, if you will, and it moved me and it changed me. And I went, I have to have more of this. There had been music in church. My mom played guitar, my dad played piano. I think on my dad's side, he composed. He would write little pieces, and I think that piece was really important. It's not like piano music was my end all be all necessarily, but it occurred to me like, oh, it isn't just other people who make up music. My dad does, which means by extension, I can, right? And one of my uncles that had passed, he had, I was surrounded by people that were making music and writing music. So there was that piece. And then I was exposed to traditional Irish dance and Irish music when I was really little. I was born on the south side of Chicago, so there's a hotbed of all of that. And river dance, I don't know if you know, river dance had
Of
just come
course.
through.
Michael
And it,
Flatley, we all loved
yeah,
him.
that's a blast from my past. So we got into that, and we went to this live Irish festival. And there was something that just resonated with me. Like, I don't know, it was in my blood or something, but the fiddles and the whistles and the accordions and like these driving rhythms, and then these like a lot of times solo voices that were just full of emotion and telling these 100-year-old stories. And something about that, it got me. And so I started playing fiddle, and we did a little bit of music, a little bit of dance, almost like, like kids would go to recitals, and like we sort of had the homeschool equivalent of that. We would play in church, or we would play in our living room for people, or a little, spotlight moment. We weren't trying to be an act or anything. But let's see, it's a long story. Because of that family tragedy that we talked about, my
Mhm.
dad was able to retire. There was a wrongful death suit. My grandparents had they had this money that was given to them. They shared some with my dad. My dad retired. We moved to Tennessee. Dad started a business. We started doing even more dance and music and all kinds of things, but kind of like extracurricular activities, right? We were still mostly just doing school, doing all these other things, and dad was doing his business. That business ended up failing, and I personally interpret that my dad kind of looked at us kids and realized like the brother right after me was he worked really, really hard and was really, really talented musically, really good dancer. Everybody kind of had different strengths and stuff. And dad started looking at us and seeing like what was marketable. Like, let's go to these dance competitions, let's get some titles, let's go to music competitions. And again, everybody had their organic interests that pulled in slightly different directions. So we kind of became this mini dance troupe, like, stair step siblings doing river dance. And it was like this, what's the word I'm looking for? Like something between a freak show and a circus, and like, oh, isn't that cute? And some of
Right.
it's very cringy to look back on, but we grew older and our skills were improving. And the band just won out piece by piece. Like there were more opportunities musically. We were in Nashville. It's no surprise, probably. And I didn't really start singing until I was in my late teens. And it was not
Mm.
something that I felt. Being on stage was kind of iffy for me. I loved writing. I loved making the music. I loved being around other people that were making the music. And being on stage was just, woo, it was a uphill climb for me, getting to where I could calmly speak in front of people, the lights, all of that. I ended up singing a song on St. Patrick's Day, completely solo, like a 10-minute song. And everybody was super drunk and loud and got silent. You could hear a pin drop. And I was like, whoa, what was that? What was whatever power that was? We all just went somewhere together in the vehicle of this like old song. And I was like, okay, I'm down. I'll learn how to do more of that. And so that's, I started being willing to sing and started writing more songs. And anyway, I now view writing, singing, making music, telling stories, all of that is just so deep in my soul. And I will
Hmm.
do it till the day I die if I can do it and travel, do it and make money, do it and make other people happy and help them. Great. I need it for me, so I
Sure.
do it there first and then it comes out authentically from there.
So I think a lot of people would have assumed that your father and mother put you guys into this acting, singing, whatever it was, because they needed the money to feed you, but it really wasn't about that. I did read that your grandparents got a big settlement of like almost $100 million and were able to live. Whether or not you got, you said you got a little bit of that, that's fine. But it's not like he was pushing you out there because you needed, to pay the rent.
Yeah, it's interesting because even in through the living of it, I didn't necessarily have a grasp on all of that. I don't know if I would have heard, millions of dollars, like heard that phrase when I was a kid.
Yeah,
It probably didn't mean anything to me. Like I probably didn't even
of
know what
course.
dollars was, right? Because I was really little. But I did like I didn't know that we were essentially poor
Hmm.
before that. Like all of us kids, except for the baby, were in one bedroom. And, if you have 6 kids and you're working a 9 to 5 in Chicago, like, nobody's flush, right? Like,
Yeah.
and I don't even know if we could have afforded to have 12 kids on that sort of situation. Like, I don't know. It was again, a worldview thing. Like, you're supposed to have as many kids as you can, as many as God gives you. But it is interesting to realized that there was this huge influx of cash, and I think that a lot of people they have inner thoughts that never get realized because you just can't bankroll them. But my dad was in a position where he could, money gives you power, and I think
Right.
that for a lot of things that maybe like just natural boundaries or impediments that were removed. Not for good or for bad, it's just that's how it happened. And so then it was for me as a child, it was like, we're moving to Narnia. We get to this big
Yeah.
house and it's in the country and we had horses and we had housekeepers. And there were like a few years where it was like, oh, I didn't realize, but we were poor and we aren't poor anymore.
Right.
um, but then when my dad's business failed, the other thing that happened right around then is our house burned down. So this huge, beautiful, like castle of a house gone, supposedly however much money it was that I didn't understand, gone, my dad's business gone. And so it was interesting because I remembered living before. So it was like a return. Oh, all the kids are back. Well, now it's all the girls in one room, all the boys in one room, one
Oh, wow.
bathroom house. I know this. Like, this makes more sense. That was an abnormality. That was a special golden time. That's
Sure.
over. We're going back to that.
Wait, I'm curious, were you guys home when the house burned down? Like, what was the story with that?
Yeah, so just some of the facts about that was it was the day after Christmas. There was a huge ice storm. I don't know if you it's like not a bunch of snow and blizzardy, but it's like warm enough that it rains, and then usually when the sun goes down, the temperature drops and everything is encased in ice, and it can be
Yeah.
so dangerous to drive. The power goes out, trees, power lines. And as best we can tell, there was probably some sort of power surge that hit part of like an old electric box or something in the house. We were not home. It was so cold. We were out at the time. We were seeing a movie, and when we came back, it was on fire, and there was pretty much nothing to do. The fire engines were already there, doing their best, but it was a complete loss. It was wild. There was
So
like
no one was injured. It wasn't some big traumatic thing besides having to move.
no, and what's interesting is you know people's houses burned down. It's pretty
Yeah.
traumatic.
Yeah.
Thankfully, yes, no one was in the house. It doesn't mean it was it was just complete out of the blue. I can't imagine like from my parents' perspective, like from my mom's perspective. But it was immediately this connection was made like, well, none of us died. Like we do have tragedy in the family where like 6 children died. Like none of us died. Like it's
Yeah.
just
That the
you know
odds are that one of you would have gotten injured. I mean, with that many, right? So that's pretty amazing.
I mean, yeah, so there wasn't this huge like our life is over. It was more like those are our things and we're all here and we can thank God. Again, it was like faith was pretty top of mind. It
Right.
was obvious that we should frame this as, you know, something that we would move forward from for sure.
Yeah. So it's interesting because we're talking about faith now here that you grew up very religious and in a religious household while all these dark, secretive things were happening, because that's so against what you learn in church, right? You learn purity and innocence and all these things. So how do you make sense of that?
I think that unfortunately for me and for many, many children, specifically girls, and that grew up to be women, um, very early on, we're kind of shown what our place is in the world. And according to the subset of the subset of the subset, right, there's many world religions. Christianity is a huge one. It's been around for thousands of years. And people use the same word, but they mean different things because
Mhm.
there's uncountable, different interpretations of that. But ours was a conservative, evangelical, even leaning fundamentalist interpretation where you're supposed to be really quite literal about the Bible, everything from, literal creation to Jesus is coming back, and here's how we need to prepare for him coming back. And that, some of the biggest life decisions, like who you marry, how many children you have, how you should spend your time, like all of those decisions should be like made biblically according to either your own personal interpretation, but there were also rules of, like, basically it came down to my dad's interpretation. Like, he was the father, he was the head of the household. It's
Mhm.
very, very patriarchal. And when I read the Bible, it's in there. It's not a stretch to make it patriarchal. I don't think that's something that any human that interprets the Bible as being patriarchal is getting it wrong. Like, it's in there.
Mhm.
As a
Mhm.
father, his son, and then the male family members, the male members of society, of the church. These are the authorities that God has put into control, and you are to obey them and to follow their authority and to be under their protection.
Mhm.
um, my dad took, I think, that and went in a very, in a criminal direction with it, right?
Mhm.
And it's interesting because I'm not here to take issue with every single thing about that version of Christianity, but I think it's very unfair to not acknowledge how problematic that is if the man that's been given all this authority decides to use it for harm. Like, it's a
Right.
bad system if there's no check and balance. And I think there's lip service given, like, oh, like, we should always follow God rather than man. And yet the lived experience as a child is not to question, like, practically speaking, you're spanked, you're programmed, all of these things set you up really to have no voice and no agency.
Mhm.
And I was lucky enough that when push came to shove, there were some really great people around me. Some were Christians, some weren't, but they didn't matter. They cared about justice and being on the right side, and they believed me and they helped me.
Yeah.
Um, but the fear of having to go up against the little mini God that was in control of our world, um, I very clearly got the message that my voice did not matter. And you talked about purity, like that, by the time that topic started coming up, I think all of the obedience and the kind of roles were already, like, the first foundation truly was you obey without asking,
Mhm.
or here's the punishment. So you have this animal level, like, in your brain before you're even thinking it through. You're just programmed to obey, or you're going to get the worst
Yeah.
beating of your life. And, like, people used to be like, how do you, ask my parents, how do you get all of your children to obey? And it's like, children in diapers are being beaten. That's how. And, like, by the time they're old enough, they are in line.
Yeah.
And so there was eventually an understanding of, like, whoa, there's some really inappropriate things going on. But there was such a lack of vocabulary. And in the Bible itself, there are lots of stories about inappropriate sexual things, whether it be rape, whether it be abuse. And no one ever talks about them. Like, they're
Yeah.
not the subject of sermons. And it was, I think I got this larger message of, like, these are the things that happen to women and children, and we don't talk about them.
Mhm.
And so there was a lot of shame by the time I realized, oh no, this is part of my experience. I better just keep quiet. you know.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it's not that uncommon. I mean, you see that people do use religion as a crutch and they act like they are holier than thou and part of this big religious community. And then they are doing the complete opposite behind the scenes. It's, I mean, so upsetting. So things clearly start to get to a head. And, in doing some research about you, it's odd to me, maybe not odd, but you guys really became known on TV very close to when this all blew up. So it's kind of like you spent many years in the shadows and then all of a sudden, 2014, 15, whatever it is rolls around and all of a sudden you are a face on the Today Show and America's Got Talent. I'm just curious because I know that you didn't have TV growing up. Is that correct?
Pretty much. I mean, there were a few times, in Chicago, I remember, oh, that's Michael Jordan on a TV screen, but
Right.
it was not, we did not watch Saturday morning cartoons. And yes, when we got our TV show, we actually had no way to watch it. So
Oh
it's,
my gosh. But was it weird being all of a sudden you were like, "Oh my gosh, I'm on TV," and you weren't somebody who was, had watched it your whole life? Did you know what that meant? Did you know that you would become
I
like
mean,
a household name?
yeah. I mean, yeah, I have memories of being a early teen and being at the mall and there were TV screens and you'd go to a cousin's house, you'd see a movie. We did go to the theater. We did not
Mhm.
believe that like all movies were evil, but my parents were very, very strict in usually not letting us listen to any music, TV, or read any
Really?
books that they didn't, they were very intentional, tried to be very, very intentional. I did plenty of things they didn't know about.
Yeah.
But like I think there's some more common ways of doing that, and I think it's tough now with the internet and social media and phones. It's like, how do you try to keep it handled? But it was pretty doable, in
Mhm.
the '90s to control what was in your house or not.
Right. So what was that experience like being, on America's Got Talent?
Well, I think it's nothing about the individual because we were on the Today Show, like you said. We had a
Mhm.
TV show on GAC, a show on TLC. We were on America's Got Talent. Honestly, a lot of it was, like I said earlier, just very uncomfortable for me. We met some lovely people, and they were the best part about it. The people that were behind the cameras or that we met, other contestants on that show. All of that was great. It was so strange to have this like you're not in the room with 2 million people, but this may go out and be seen by 2 million people who you don't
Mhm.
know. And then they think they know you because they've been in your house. And it is very strange. I just don't know that that will ever be natural to me. I do have to look back, though, and say, hey, doesn't it make sense that a good part of what was so uncomfortable about that had nothing to do with TV and more to do with what was underneath and what
Yeah.
was, I describe in my book that it really felt like I was wearing like a time bomb strapped to my chest that wasn't
Mhm.
visible from the outside, but I knew it was there. And the more public we became, the more it felt like, that tick, tick, tick was intensifying. And it's not that that hadn't been there for years before, that had always been there, as far as I can remember. But it
Yeah.
was very strange. It felt like every moment putting on putting on the best smile, putting on the best show was the best means to not trigger this bomb that would destroy me and everybody around me, and all these horrible worst case scenarios in my head all the time.
And was it a ticking bomb of you were just nervous that something was gonna happen, that you were gonna get physically or sexually abused again or someone else would? Or was it more about, you were nervous that the secret would come out?
Interesting question. I would say both, because there was the immediate, more kind of animal, like at any moment when it was towards the end, it was better when the cameras were there because it meant that dad at least had to like not he had to, not be caught on camera doing something. He
Yeah.
was getting more and more violent. And I write in my book about a time in the months before I left where unfortunately for me and the rest of us there were no cameras around. There was no crew. There was nobody but us on the bus. And my dad like hit me in the face and assaulted me and came at me and I was like, I'm gonna die, and it was like I wish someone else was around to keep this part at bay. And yet it was so scary whenever they were around, like, are they gonna catch anything? Am I gonna say the wrong thing? Is someone gonna guess? And you alluded kind of earlier to, oh, how interesting, like you were becoming more public, and then that's kind of when everything got discovered. But of course, right, the more people you're around, like it's harder and harder to keep secrets. And again, just reminding everyone, it isn't one person we're talking about. We're talking about 14 different stories, 14 different subjective things. But from my perspective, it was like, I don't, how do I keep this together? How do I not ruin it all? How do I juggle all of this? And I had met my now husband by that point, and the closer any of us individually got to someone else, that would always threaten my dad's control. My brother, my other sisters, us older kids all had to deal with our relationships, not being able to have relationships and being like really policed.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the more we were on TV, the more people were around, the closer they were with us. We had people that were being like, what's going on? Something is off. And I just think it was a matter of time.
What do you think was the triggering thing that people thought was off? Was it a look? Was it a feeling? Like what was that?
I'm not sure. I think it's very interesting because I've definitely talked with a lot of people personally, or I'll just see comments online. People will send me unsolicited messages all the time and just be like, from the moment I saw your dad on TV, I knew he was abusive. And I'm kind of like, I'm not here to not believe you or say you're wrong. I think that you do sort of develop. I have met people where instantly I'm like, something's off with that dude. So, kind of a radar thing. I think it's very tough to, you don't want to not trust your gut. My gut was telling me things. It was screaming at me for years, and I was ignoring it the best I could. At the same time, that's not proof. That's not, there's a lot of different things. Everything's subjective. It could be reminding us of something that made us uncomfortable and have nothing to do with that person.
Sure, 100%, yeah.
But I think people look at my dad, and we all have information now that we didn't have then. It's very hard not to let that color how we see things. It's so chilling now to look back at like clips that probably at first didn't seem as sinister as they of course do now because we have more context. Yeah, it's so wild to look at the apparent gap between, wow, that's what I said on camera to an interviewer about how great everything was, but I can now, with time and with safety and vocabulary, go, I was assaulted the day before. I was hit in the face, and there I am smiling like my life depends upon it. And some people said they could tell, other people couldn't,
So I just want to talk about the abuse for a second, because as you have written a book about this, talking about it helps other people who maybe are stuck in a situation similar to you. So just clarify for people what you went through. I mean, you've talked about feeling and remembering that you were abused as early as 3 or 4 years old. Talk about what life was like, with the male figure in your life who you're supposed to learn unconditional love from is the person who is sexually and physically abusing you in secret. What was that like?
If anyone ever experiences sexual or physical abuse, they're also receiving emotional and mental abuse as well. Just because you're being emotionally abused doesn't mean it always has a physical manifestation, but if it's become physical, there's the mental aspect as well. So we had a whole gamut of things going on, and I am so lucky to have been in the position where I've been offered help, and then I did the part of accepting that help and leaning into it, and then benefiting from so much amazing professional help. And so I can now look at it in a way that doesn't trigger me, which is a huge victory. Just recalling some of these things to mind, either purposefully or God forbid, being triggered unintentionally and feeling like I was still in it, that was my reality for years. And so it's extremely empowering now to be able to talk about it. I think, you mentioned it certainly can help others to talk about it. I don't think anyone should be pressured to do it. I feel, again, very lucky and kind of responsible. I'm in a place where I'm safe enough, and I actually benefit from talking and about it. So if it helps other people, how much better. And that was a big reason to write, but then share my book. Yeah, my dad was sexually abusive from my earliest memories. It was around 3.5 or 4 is my first one I can remember. from what I've learned, there were some things about that memory that it could have been going on that probably was not the first time. It's just the first time I can remember. And it would be qualified as like molestation. He was just touching me, a place in my body that I didn't have a name for. It was how I wrote to try to, how I put it in the book to try to get across for people just how young I was. It wasn't like I'm being molested. It was like, I wonder what's happening. And as a kid, every day we try a food or we learn a word or we have some experience that we just trust that at some point we'll learn what it means or the adults will help us. And that's the category that we started off with. My dad escalated his behavior over the years to the point where when I was around 9 or 10, he had a different experience. He did something different. And in my state, in Tennessee, it's considered a rape of a child. And that was one of the first times where the experience of the sexual abuse itself was so physically overwhelming, discomforting, maybe not like painful as in like searing pain or a cut or something, but I wanted out of my body. It was so overwhelming. All the stuff before that was just confusing. I was never fearful or physically in pain or discomfort, but that time changed everything. And I realized all the stuff before led us to this moment. And there was more escalating behavior that went up until I was in my teens. But, my main response was the second it was over, or even during, just to pretend like it wasn't even happening, to even recall or remember or think about it was so overwhelming. It was like I was still in it. So I just did what, I realize now is really, really common, but you dissociate. It's a big word, but you just kind of stop, you check out. A lot of times people have sensations of like leaving their body or viewing from above, or like all those things applied to me. And you do inner gymnastics in your head to escape in ways that you physically cannot, because this was my caregiver, someone that I'm around all the time. And the only real option to get away from him was to run away from my entire family and life. And because I had food and comfort and people that I cared about, and for so many reasons, like that just did not register as an actual option for me. And it doesn't mean that the physical and sexual abuse wasn't horrible. It's just my mind couldn't give that the weight that it really needed to activate myself to get out until I was in my early 20s, realizing this is bad enough. It's never going to stop. I've become a part of this. The only thing you can do is try to get out. You can't change the system. You can't make the truth come out. You can't anything. You need professional help, or you're probably going to.
As the sexual abuse waned with you, were you curious about whether it was happening with your other siblings?
I think, this is something I've worked through with therapy, and I wanted to be really honest about in my book, is that there was an awareness in my family. Everybody had different, some of my youngest siblings were 5 and 6 and 7 when dad was arrested. That's very different than being in your early 20s like me. I had an awareness that my dad was abusive towards other sisters. And the only reason I'm comfortable saying that is because some of my sisters have gone on record of their own accord to say that they were abused. Otherwise, I wouldn't want to say that. I would want to try to preserve their ability to say that or not. And some of the older kids were more public sooner than I was, because I was still like deep in therapy, not sure that I had enough time to face what I'd gone through, figure out how to articulate it. So that was kind of hard, but I appreciated their choices, and I feel a lot more, I'm talking about it a lot more now. And, I realize now it was something that I would have spent so much energy not thinking about, like so much energy to never, ever, ever let it come into my head. But as I was leaving, and as I had the opportunity to participate in my dad's investigation and prosecution and all of that, there were so many years that he should have been stopped, and I should have stopped him. That's a fact. It's also a fact that I didn't feel like I could, and I feel like I did the best that I could. Like, if you didn't know better, that's one thing, but once you know better, you should do better. And so I
Yeah.
really have this commitment to do that. But I think
Right.
one of the hardest things to look back on is it's really hard to blame 3-year-old me. I don't blame 3-year-old me. I don't blame 9-year-old me. I don't blame 12-year-old me. I don't even really blame 16-year-old me. I really do start being very hard on like 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, because I have the excuses of, well, I was never taught anything different, or I didn't have this or this, that. Well, at some point, you have to become that. If you don't have the tool, you have to go get it. And I really feel like when everyone else that I was letting down, my other siblings, my mom, I was letting myself down first. And if I
Mhm.
didn't realize that even if no one else was in the picture, if I was the only one being abused, it I deserved to not be experiencing that. I deserve to be safe. I deserve to be believed and defended and all of those things. And my mom was not in a position to be able to do that for me. She should have. Like, parents should be able to do that for their children. And I
Mhm.
I didn't get that as a kid, but I wasn't the kid anymore. Now
Yeah.
I was an adult. I was legally an adult. In some ways, I was probably more like 14, emotionally, and in some life experiences, very withheld. But there was a time I wrote about in my book, I referenced when the cameras weren't there and my dad
Mhm.
attacked me and we were on our bus. And I just remember thinking, oh shit, nobody's nobody's coming. Everybody, the rest of my family was there and just saw that. No one stopped dad, no one. And then I was like, I didn't stop dad. I didn't get out. I
Right.
didn't stand up for my own self. And
Even to the police when they came on that bus
yeah,
and
that's one
questioned
of the
you.
things is like it wasn't like there was gunshots or anything like that, but the bus had pulled over and a police car came up. Sorry, I'm not narrating the full story, but it's in the
Oh,
book.
it's fine.
I went and hid, and it was like no one even had to tell me to go hide my bloodied face because I wouldn't have had to say anything. If a police officer saw my face, something would have happened. But it was still like, don't ruin it. Don't, like, that was more important than me getting safe.
Right.
That was a really low point because I realized, oh my goodness, I have let it get so far. In fact, I don't even know at this point if I can choose anything healthier or better. Like, I
Right.
want to, but I just don't know if I can. Um, and luckily I did. Like, I wanted to live. I thought about, well, maybe I just shouldn't be alive. And a part of
Mhm.
me was like, yep, that's the answer.
Mhm.
Because it's too hard to acknowledge that, yeah, my dad has done this to me and I've let it happen and I'm gonna die here. But I found that I had reasons to keep on living, and to keep fighting, but it got a lot harder from that point out. When I talk to people, something that I tend to say a lot of is it gets worse before it gets better because you have to
Yeah.
start admitting how bad it is. And then if you're in a situation with a criminal narcissist abuser and you try to get out and they feel that, they bring that hammer down harder than ever before.
Right.
Um, and it just got that much more violent until I finally got out.
Right. And so people should read your book Unspeakable, but that becomes sort of the beginning of the end. You do get the courage to leave. Luckily enough, you had found such a love in your now husband and his family that really gave you the strength to kind of help you get out. But it wasn't anyone in your family that tipped off the police or the authorities on what was going on. Um, I, I was curious because I didn't read. Was there someone in particular that tipped them off, or it was just a group of
Yeah,
people?
it's definitely someone that I know, and I, do talk about it in the book, and
Okay.
in a way that people can kind of figure out who it is. But that person, they have a life and a family, and they haven't ever really stepped forward to kind of claim that or publicize that. So I like to do what I can to, again, kind of let that be their
But
choice.
the point is they couldn't sit by and allow it to happen anymore. So,
Yes,
but you were the first one to be brought in to talk to the
from the
police, correct?
family.
Yeah.
From the family, yes. So, it was a friend of the family who had known us for a while, and my now husband and a couple other people. It was people that were getting close to us kids, to us
Mhm.
oldest kids, and we're getting close enough and we're trying to have relationships and friendships, and we're realizing, whoa, something's really off.
Mm-hmm.
And my now husband had asked me if it was basically, is it in the category of sexual abuse? Has your dad done this? And I just like very briefly said yes, but then also was like, everything's fine. It's like, you know, it was like, are you safe? It's like, yes, no, I was getting hit in the face. Like I was still not telling the truth, and I was doing what I could to kind of try to mitigate it. But you know, there's so much that we could talk about, but the
Yeah.
getting out part is absolutely crazy. It's like a movie.
Mm-hmm.
You know, my now husband, other people were trying to like get me information, trying to like, I didn't know what word to
Because at
call.
the time you couldn't speak to him, right? You were forbidden to talk
Oh
to.
yeah, I wasn't
Yeah.
allowed to talk to him. And most of those other people that were like trying to get close, trying to figure it out, they also weren't allowed to talk to my family usually. But yes, basically it got to the point where there's a number of people that were like, we can't not say, we don't have any proof. No one in the family is talking. Everybody's trying to cover it up, but like we know something is off, and just for our own consciousness, we need to report this. And I had gotten out, had just started therapy, and I was in this like fire hose to the face of like information of like, oh my God, I didn't know that rape of a child was something that I experienced. Like I would have given some wrong information because it sounds so stupid, but I didn't know how to correctly describe what I'd been through. And it took a lot. It was so emotional, so taxing to start letting this stuff out. And
Mm-hmm.
it was
And also to have to talk to authorities about it, you know,
right.
it's like,
But
it's not like you're talking to somebody very intimate.
and I think this is really important. And my therapist, I think, was really smart. And she was asking me more and more information and being like, hey, you know, what do you know about your other siblings? Like, do you like, we need to be very concerned. And I want to believe that I was getting closer and closer to being able to pick up the phone myself and directly speak to what I had experienced, because what I was learning is that people like my dad never stop. If they
Mm-hmm.
have access to children, they will keep abusing. And so there becomes, this is something that survivors are just trying to like keep breathing,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're just trying to survive. And yet many times the burden of is it going to be your fault if this person is still out there abusing? You know, what does that heaviness look like? And the way my story went is I didn't have to be that first person. Someone should have done it years ago. My mother should have done it. I should have done it.
Yeah.
Other people should have done it. Once someone did do it, it changed everything. But then the first thing they needed is someone to speak to it firsthand. And it had to be me. I was the only person who had gotten any support yet, who had stepped out of the situation. So dad couldn't like, you know, get me from the back. He wasn't there. He was out of the room finally.
Mm-hmm.
And so the guy who reported got talked to, my now husband got talked to, and pretty quickly, like within 24 hours, I was talking to TBI, which is the Tennessee version of the FBI.
Mm-hmm. And eventually, just to move the story forward, your father pled guilty and is now serving 40 years in prison. Um, were you surprised he pled guilty from the
Yeah.
beginning? Did he admit it?
Yeah, that's how no, no, he didn't. From the way I started my book was that moment I went to the sentencing because it looked like, are we going to go to a trial? Is he going to admit to any of this? And there was a plea deal on the table. And I don't know, I certainly learned that there was a lot I didn't know about our justice system. I've learned a lot, for better or for
Mm-hmm.
worse. But plea deals happen usually when someone's getting threatened with 10 things. It was 100 things in my dad's case. There were 100 counts that
Wow.
were going to be that he was threatened with. We're going to try to get you for 100 things. If you will say you're guilty, we'll drop it down and we'll be done with it. We don't have to go to trial. We don't have to. And there's so many reasons you don't want to have to go to trial. But I was like, but if he has to say guilty, it may not happen, because he has never admitted to anything. He had apologized throughout the years whenever, a few times, always while denying that anything had ever happened. Well, I'm sorry, or well, something's wrong with me, or whatever. But like never being honest about what had happened. Never, and he was insisting that I was lying when he was arrested.
Wow.
And he lied about things that they eventually had evidence for. So just lying, lying, lying. And I was like, I'll believe it when I see it. If he can make his mouth move and say guilty, then I'll believe it. But until that moment, like that would undo all of these 20 years of power that he has had. And it was it was just mind bending because all he really had to do is say one word and it like all came crashing down. Like I
Mm-hmm.
was so afraid of his power, of he's gonna hurt me, he's gonna kill me, I could never. And like all it took was one split second of the minimum of truth,
Mm-hmm.
saying guilty, and that ended everything.
So he pled guilty to 4 counts of child rape. Is that what it ended up being?
I believe so. If I remember the specifics of it, I believe all 4 counts were rape of a child.
Right. And eventually your siblings came out and did share their own stories and obviously, I'm assuming, helped in this conviction. But has he I mean, does anyone talk to him anymore?
I'll just right there, I'll just speak for myself. I've had no
Okay.
contact with him. I know some extended family members and stuff have, but it's been years since I've, kind of let people know I wanted to be updated on the subject.
Mhm.
The best, I've said this a number of times because it just, when I thought about it, this is the best way to say it. But, you know, one of the best things about this new life that I have is that he's not a part of it. And he dictated so
Wow.
many things about my previous life. And so, I don't have a plan to never talk to him again or to talk to him again. Like I just have to do one step at a time. And right now this is what's far and away, this is what's best for me. Sorry, didn't mean to hit my
That's okay.
here.
I'm curious because you come from such a religious family. Do you I know like forgiveness is such a big part probably of your upbringing. Is he somebody you feel like you have forgiven, you have to forgive him? What about your mother and forgiveness of not sort of you were a child of sort of not standing up for you? I'm curious about the word forgiveness for you.
Yeah, I think initially forgiveness for me meant a lot more like excusing someone.
Mhm.
And I don't feel comfortable excusing anybody, including
Sure.
like my younger self, right? Or older younger self. I think that it isn't about saying something someone did was okay. It's more
Mhm.
about do you have hate in your heart for this person? Like how do you feel towards them?
Mhm.
Sometimes people mean that more when they say the word forgiveness. For me, I'm definitely able to get to a place of empathy for my own younger self, definitely empathy for my mother, definitely empathy for my dad. My dad was a kid, and I've learned at some point he was a kid, as we all were and are. And I've learned about abusers in general that many times they have their own abuse, sometimes sexual abuse in their childhoods. They'll have trauma, they'll have physical injuries, all sorts of different things. I've learned that a lot of those red flags, like my dad does have in his background. I'll never have all the answers. Of like why, like at first my question was why,
Yeah.
and it was interesting because then it almost changed to how, and it was a lot easier to answer that question. And even if the hows aren't specific to my dad, understanding more in general, like learning has been a huge help for me. And if I ever did go to college, I'd probably be studying psychology or something because it's
Yeah.
very interesting. So I can have a lot of empathy for my dad's child self and younger self. At the same time, I think having empathy, balancing that with accountability is very important, whether it's me, my mom, my dad. That I think no matter how painful it is, acknowledging what the truth is required. So as long as my dad or other people are not admitting to what they've done, then they can't work towards any sort of reconciliation or anything because they're not even admitting the truth. Um,
Has he reached out to you?
I don't. There's no way for him to contact me.
Got it. Okay.
Um, so I know I saw something years later to the effect of like a small apology that for me personally sounded a lot like things that he had said years ago and didn't ring true. I'm not the judge of his soul, thankfully. So as far as we were talking about we've brought up faith and you're kind of asking about forgiveness, you know, we talk a lot about like Jesus forgiving of sins, right? And there's like this Bible verse that even when I was trying to leave my family's house really haunted me. And I do not follow what I was raised with anymore. I'm not even sure, to some, at least according to how I was raised, I wouldn't be considered a Christian because I don't believe all of those same things. Now, I'm
Okay.
not saying I've completely left the tent. I'm trying to figure that out because there's so many other ways of being Christian that are not nearly as toxic and harmful and criminal.
Yeah.
But there's this verse in the Bible. It's there. People can look it up. I'm blanking on the reference, but it says like, if you do not forgive others, your father, referring to God, again, the term father for God, but he will not forgive you. So if you don't forgive other people, God won't forgive you. And that was really hard for me because I was like, I can't what? Tell that I'm abused. And it was like, you're not like condemning your dad's soul to hell by saying what he did to you.
Yeah.
You know, like that's not forgiving someone. And so
Yeah.
that shows how off what I thought forgiveness was.
Mhm.
Um, all that to say, I don't know if you know the name Edith Eva Eggers. I think I'm saying it correctly, maybe Eggers. She is a Holocaust survivor. She is a brilliant psychologist. She's written a book called The Choice, and she does this amazing thing where she can speak as an expert, but she's also speaking to her own lived experience being a teenager in Auschwitz. Like, it's an insane story.
Mhm.
And she talks about, people would ask her if she like forgave Hitler. And she was talking about how for her, she had this really big breakthrough with forgiveness, realizing that it's more about accepting what it was that happened and
Yeah.
not wishing for something else. Like, of course, if we have, no one should ever be abused. No one should ever endure these horrible things. But if they've happened, forgiveness to me seems more about accepting that that is what happened and making
Right.
peace with that. I don't need to I can't do my dad's work for him. Like at the very, very end of my book, I kind of thank different people. And at the end, I've just, I was like, is there anything I have to say to my dad? It's like, I hope he does his work because he's the only one who can do it. I'm
Mhm.
assuming he has his own things to heal from before he turned into who he turned into.
Yeah.
Um, but, I had decades of waiting around for him to choose something healthier or better or be the dad that he should have been or that I
Right.
desperately wanted him to be. Because inside there's a little girl who just wants to be loved by her dad. And he
Yeah.
was never a safe and good dad he was never the dad that I needed or should have had.
Right.
Um, and that will never be fixed. That will never be right. We can't go back and undo that. But I honestly am at the point where I can, with no qualm, say I wish him well the way I would want any human to be healthy, to be well. Don't wish anything ill on anybody because life's too short to like have something negative towards anybody else, even someone that hurt you that bad.
Yeah.
Uh, but
Yeah.
all that to say, to me, that is forgiveness. That
Mhm.
is like, I feel like I've forgiven my dad. The reason why I don't just say yes when people ask me that is, again, because of the context of how I was raised. What that would have meant to me is that I kind of pardon or whitewash the things that he's done, or that I think that I should somehow still be under his authority or have to have a relationship with him. And like, I don't think that's what forgiveness means.
Yeah. No, it's beautifully said. I think anyone listening to this would want to know what your relationship is now with your siblings and with your mother. I know that you have broken off. They sort of stayed together and had the band for a while. I'm curious
Mhm.
where they're at and why you broke from them. And you're doing your own music. I mean, by the way, it's gorgeous. What you're
Oh, thank
doing
you.
is fantastic, and just you have the most beautiful voice.
Oh, I appreciate that. It's a lot of fun to be making music and doing some of those same things that for so long were right alongside such toxic things, but it can be free
Mhm.
from that now.
Mhm.
So it's been extremely rewarding and deeply healing to reclaim my voice, and we can mean that without meaning it literally, but for me it was literal,
Mhm.
whether it's speaking and telling a story or, releasing music and singing. With my family, they did continue to do things publicly as a band for a little while. And since none of them are, some of them have social media accounts and stuff, but they, generally speaking, are living a much more private life, and definitely want to respect that. And as far as me to my siblings, I'm just trying to learn how every day that much more just being their sister and being a
Yeah.
healthy, good sister. And I think if we're lucky to have siblings and family in our lives, cheering on the wins. I've made a little music with some of my siblings when it feels right, and that's been a sweet opportunity to kind of, again, with each other, rewrite some of those associations. A lot of them still do music, but not professionally or in any sort of career way
So
right
there's no Willis Clan still
there's
touring.
no, and there hasn't been
Okay.
um, for a while.
Okay.
Um,
But like,
yeah,
are you guys getting together on Thanksgiving and Christmas and stuff like that?
I see most of them
Okay. And your
somewhat.
mom is raising some of them in the home still, right?
So my youngest sibling is still quite young,
Yeah.
but it's wild how much they've all grown up. I'm in my 30s now,
Right. I keep
and
picturing you, as 23 or
right,
something.
like, or I'm 23 or I'm 16, and I'm very much not. But with my mom, I think that one of the biggest things for us was right around when I was finishing writing my book, or kind of beginning to write my book, or beginning to admit that I was writing a book. I had done all this writing for therapy. I had done all this writing personally, all these different things. And I got to the point where I needed to make a decision about whether I was going to say anything publicly. If I was going to do music, for example, like how was I going to handle and confront and, you know, reclaim and all of those things. And it felt so much bigger than me because it's not just my story.
Mhm.
Our whole family story is intertwined. And how do you leave room for other people's stories? And I'm not saying I've done a perfect job of it. I don't think there is such a thing as a perfect job. Like, we do the best that we can, we learn as we go. Um, and I do feel like it was very much the right decision for me to release my book. And there were times where I worried, like, is this the wrong thing for other people? And then I realized that's not my job. I can't, you know, the only decisions I'm making are mine.
Yeah.
But I talked with my mom about what it would mean for me to say more than I ever had before. And she pretty much immediately gave me her support in one, me saying whatever it was that I wanted to say, and saying the truth and saying more. And that meant a lot for me because if you read the book, I mean, you'll understand why. And even our conversation has touched on, it's so tempting to want to say, oh no, we didn't know. This is
Mhm.
all a surprise. This is, and it's like how people hear, they're very hard on my mom. Sometimes people are hard on me or my siblings, but generally speaking, um, I feel really lucky and really privileged, honestly, that people have been very kind in telling deep, dark, hard truths that are not
Mhm.
flattering about oneself. You're opening yourself up to people coming in and telling you how you were wrong, telling you you should have done better. And I'm thankful that I don't get more of that. People can be really hard on my mom, and not necessarily wrongly so. It's just, guys, it's a lot more. I think this is what's so telling is people say, either to me, but usually about my mom or something, they'll say, well, I would have blah, 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 and say they would have chosen something different. And I'm not here to argue with people. What I will say is that the data shows us that that is not the norm. The norm is not, well, I would have killed him. I would have gotten out of there. I would have this. I would have that. This is how things happen. If you think you're immune or if you think you're totally different, you would do well usually to learn about how these things happen. Look into how domestic violence actually does happen. These are not dumb women. These are
Mhm.
not stupid people or kids. These are intelligent, bright, wonderful, complex people that are in really, really hard circumstances. It doesn't
Mhm.
excuse crimes and bad choices and all these things, and sometimes it escalates to death and such horrible harm. But it's like kind of with cults, people think, oh, stupid people join cults, and it's like, look into it, because the less susceptible you think you are, sometimes the more you truly are at risk for these things. And I just think it was really helpful. Just like I learned, this wasn't a problem with just my dad or just me. There are abusers the world over that we're just one instance of how these things happen. And we fit the pattern insanely. And it's like chilling and sad, but also relieving, because it's not like uniquely your problem. We can learn about this and we can be preventative. We can learn the signs. And it's like really helpful. And with my mom, like my mom fits the pattern of, domestic violence survivors and wives and romantic partners of really, really abusive people. And again, the great news is like, there are signs, there are preventative things, there's a lot more research, there's a lot more, hey, we can shift public opinion to not incorrectly assume things are different than they really are. So, I mean, I guess it's a case, I'm making a case for longer form discussion, openness, not judging. And that's really tough. I love podcasts because it's not just time for two questions. I feel more comfortable wading into some of these things, because if I have to say one thing and it gets chopped up, it can come across very wrong. Like I did some press around my book coming out, and I was like, misunderstood, like, man, resonating with that. You're no stranger to like when other people want to take your story and change it into something. And the way we fight back on that is having more complex conversations, and to listen with less judgment, and more curiosity and more empathy, and hopefully we'll learn something and we'll be better people for it.
Right. Jessica Willis Fisher, your book, Unspeakable, people can get it where?
Hopefully anywhere, definitely Amazon. I like to find it in my Barnes & Noble. In Nashville, we have our Parnassus. The paperback is coming soon to the US. It was just added in the UK, so.
Amazing. I just received it last night. I look forward to reading it. I think you're so inspirational. Last quick question. Do you think that you see children in your future?
Great question. I get asked this so often, or maybe not a great question, but very common question. I don't know. Honestly, I'm pretty terrified of it. And I think like I would think I would have a very rich, wonderful life, either way. I'm not set yes or no at this point, but it is interesting the amount of times that I get asked that. But yeah.
Well, you have a lot of lessons to share with someone, and you are an extraordinary, lovely woman. And it was an honor to meet you.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciated the thoughtful conversation.
Thank you so much for listening to Misunderstood. I'm your host, Rachel Yucatel. Please be sure to subscribe to the show and give us a 5-star rating and review. You can support the show by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/misunderstood with Rachel Yucatel. Do you have ideas for the show or want to reach out? Email us at info misunderstoodpodcast@gmail.com. That's spelled MISS understood. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.